The room where she grew up was never quiet. There were always sounds moving through the walls. Voices from the street below, the hum of old fans, the clatter of dishes, and sometimes the radio playing softly in the background. But among all those sounds, there was one that mattered to her more than anything else. The piano. It was not a shiny instrument. Its surface had small scratches, and some keys were slightly yellow with age. It had been there long before she truly understood music. At first, it was just another piece of furniture in the house. But over time, it became a place where she felt safe. A place where she could be honest without speaking a single word. She never told anyone how much the piano meant to her. To most people, she was quiet, polite, and easy to overlook. She did well enough in school, helped when asked, and never tried to stand out. People often described her as nice or simple. No one ever used the word talented. No one imagined there was anything extraordinary about her. When she was alone, things were different. She would sit at the piano after long days, sometimes late at night, when everyone else was asleep. Her fingers would rest on the keys as if they already knew where to go. She didn't always play loudly. Often, the music was soft, careful, almost secret. It felt like the piano was listening to her, not judging her. She had never taken many formal lessons. Money was always tight, and lessons were considered unnecessary. People believed music was a hobby, not something serious. So she learned in her own way. She watched others play when she could. She listened closely to every sound. She practiced the same pieces again and again until they felt like part of her breathing. Sometimes she made mistakes. Sometimes her fingers slipped. But she never stopped. Each mistake taught her something. Each quiet night at the piano made her stronger, even if no one else noticed. As the years passed, her skill grew quietly. There were moments when she surprised herself. She would play something difficult and realize she had done it without fear. But she kept those moments to herself. She didn't think the world was ready to hear her, and maybe she wasn't ready either. At school and in the community, she was rarely chosen for anything special. When music events came up, teachers and organizers picked students who were loud, confident, and already known. She stayed in the background, clapping politely while others took the spotlight. One day, a small public event was announced. It was nothing grand, just a local gathering where people would perform simple acts. Singing, short speeches, and a bit of music. Someone mentioned that a piano would be available, and anyone who could play was welcome. She almost didn't sign up. The thought of playing in front of people made her chest feel tight. Her hands felt cold just thinking about it. Still, something inside her whispered that maybe this was a chance. Not a big one, but a chance. When she quietly told an organizer that she could play the piano, the response was polite but not excited. She was looked at briefly, then smiled at kindly. "That's fine," they said. "Just keep it basic. Nothing complicated. People just want something simple." The words were not meant to be cruel, but they landed heavily. Something basic. She nodded and agreed. She didn't argue. She didn't explain. On the outside, she looked calm. On the inside, her thoughts were loud. She wondered if they were right. Maybe people didn't want to hear more. Maybe her music was too much. Too emotional. Too deep. That night, she sat at the piano longer than usual. She played the simple pieces she knew well. Easy melodies. Familiar sounds. They were fine, but they didn't feel honest. They didn't feel like her. Then, without planning to, her hands moved into something stronger. The music grew fuller. The notes carried weight. She stopped suddenly, afraid someone might hear. She closed the piano lid and sat in silence. The days leading up to the event passed slowly. Every time she thought about it, her stomach tightened. She remembered every moment she had been overlooked. Every time someone assumed she wasn't capable of more. Friends spoke about the event casually. Some joked about it being boring. Others talked about who would perform. No one mentioned her. She practiced quietly, carefully choosing what she would play. She told herself she would follow the advice. Keep it simple. Don't draw attention. Don't risk embarrassment. But something felt wrong. Each time she practiced the basic piece, her heart felt heavy. The music did not reflect the years she had spent alone at the piano. It did not carry her story. On the morning of the event, she almost decided not to go. She stood in front of the mirror, looking at herself. There was nothing about her appearance that suggested anything special. Just a regular person in regular clothes. She took a deep breath and reminded herself that she didn't need to impress anyone. She only needed to play. The venue was small, filled with folding chairs and quiet conversation. The piano sat at the front, waiting. People walked past it without much interest. As she waited for her turn, she listened to the other performances. Everything was fine, pleasant, predictable. People clapped politely, smiled, and moved on. When her name was finally called, there was little reaction. A few heads turned. Some people checked their phones. No one expected much. She walked toward the piano slowly, feeling every step. Her hands trembled slightly as she sat down. The bench felt cold beneath her. She placed her fingers on the keys and paused. In that quiet moment before the first note was played, she felt the weight of every time she had been told to stay small. Every time she had hidden her ability to make others comfortable. She reminded herself why she loved the piano. Not for praise, not for approval, but for the way it allowed her to speak when words failed. She took another breath, and then she began to play. After the first notes filled the room, time seemed to slow down for her. She could hear the sound clearly, but everything else faded. The quiet talking stopped. The small noises, the shuffling of chairs, even the soft coughs disappeared. All that remained was the piano and the steady beat of her heart. She had started just as she was told. The melody was simple and familiar. Anyone listening would think this was all she had to offer. Her fingers moved gently, carefully, as if she were walking on thin ice. She kept her eyes on the keys, afraid to look up. Inside her mind, a battle was happening. Part of her wanted to stay safe, finish the basic piece, stand up, and quietly return to her seat. No risk, no judgment, just another performance forgotten by the end of the day. But another part of her felt heavy with regret. That part remembered the long nights alone with the piano, the sore fingers, the moments when music helped her through sadness and doubt. That part knew the truth. This simple tune was not her whole story. She felt her hands hesitate for a brief moment. In the audience, people were relaxed. Some leaned back in their chairs. A few nodded along politely. It was pleasant but nothing special. Exactly what they expected. She could stop there. Instead, she made a quiet choice. Without looking up, she shifted into a deeper set of notes. The change was not sudden, but it was clear. The sound grew warmer, fuller. The rhythm slowed slightly, then gained strength. Her fingers moved with more confidence, as if they had been waiting for permission. A few people noticed. Someone in the front row leaned forward. Another stopped tapping their foot and looked up from their phone. The music was no longer just background sound. It was asking to be heard. Her breathing changed as well. The tight feeling in her chest eased just a little. She was no longer playing for approval. She was playing because she needed to. With each passing second, the music grew more expressive. Soft moments were followed by powerful ones. The piano seemed to respond to her emotions, echoing feelings she had never spoken out loud. She remembered being told to keep things basic. The memory no longer hurt as much. Instead, it pushed her forward. The room felt different now. The casual mood had shifted into something more serious. People were sitting up straight. Eyes were fixed on the piano. Even those who knew nothing about music could feel that something important was happening. She still did not look up. Her hands moved faster now, but not carelessly. Every note had purpose. Every pause carried meaning. The music told a story of patience, frustration, hope, and quiet strength. There were moments when she thought she might make a mistake. Her heart raced during the more difficult parts, but her fingers did not stop. Years of private practice carried her through. In her mind, she was no longer in the small venue. She was back in the dimly lit room of her childhood, sitting at the old piano late at night. She could almost hear the familiar creak of the bench and feel the worn keys beneath her fingers. Those memories gave her courage. The sound of the piano filled every corner of the room. Even the air seemed to vibrate with it. The music was not loud for the sake of being loud. It was strong because it needed to be. A woman near the aisle wiped her eyes without realizing it. A man in the back slowly crossed his arms, completely focused. Someone whispered, "Wow," before quickly falling silent again. She sensed the shift, even without looking. For the first time, she allowed herself to play freely. Not perfectly, but honestly. The notes rose and fell like waves, sometimes gentle, sometimes intense. Felt like she was finally telling the truth. There was a moment when her hands flew across the keys, and she felt a rush of fear. But it was followed by relief. She was doing it. She was not holding back anymore. The piano seemed alive beneath her touch. The closer she came to the end, the more emotional the music became. The final section was slower, heavier, filled with feeling. Each note lingered in the air, refusing to be ignored. The room was completely silent now. No phones, no whispers, no movement, just listening. She reached the final chord and held it for a moment longer than necessary. Her fingers trembled slightly as the sound faded. When she lifted her hands from the keys, the silence stayed. For one long second, no one reacted. Her heart dropped. She wondered if she had gone too far, if she had broken some unspoken rule, if she had embarrassed herself by not following instructions. She kept her eyes down, staring at her hands resting in her lap. Then she heard it. A single clap, then another, then many more. The applause grew quickly, filling the room with sound just as powerful as the music had been moments before. People stood up, some without realizing it. Faces showed surprise, admiration, and even disbelief. She finally looked up. What she saw made her breath catch. People were smiling at her. Really smiling. Not politely, but with genuine emotion. Some nodded at her as if to say they understood now. Her eyes filled with tears, but she blinked them away. She stood slowly, unsure of what to do. The clapping did not stop. In that moment, she realized something important. All the times she had been overlooked did not define her. All the moments she had stayed quiet had not erased her ability. Her talent had been there all along, waiting. As the applause continued, she bowed her head slightly, not out of habit, but out of gratitude. Gratitude for the piano. Gratitude for the courage she had found. When she walked away from the bench, her legs felt weak, but her heart felt lighter than it had in years. She returned to her seat as the next person prepared to perform, but nothing felt the same anymore. Something had changed, and she knew, deep down, that this moment was only the beginning. After she returned to her seat, her hands were still shaking. She rested them in her lap and tried to calm her breathing. The applause had faded, and the event moved on, but her mind had not caught up yet. It felt as if she were still sitting at the piano, hearing the echo of the last note. People around her whispered softly. She caught fragments of their words without trying to listen. Simple reactions. Surprise, praise, questions. It all felt unreal, like it was happening to someone else. She kept her eyes forward, afraid that if she looked around too much, the moment would disappear. The next performances went on, but they felt distant. Songs were sung. Speeches were made. People clapped politely again. The room slowly returned to its normal rhythm, but something had shifted beneath the surface. A few people glanced at her now and then. Some smiled when their eyes met hers. Others looked curious, as if they were trying to understand where that music had come from. She sat quietly, her back straight, her heart still full. For the first time in a long while, she did not feel invisible. When the event finally ended, chairs scraped against the floor as people stood up. Conversations grew louder. Coats were picked up. The ordinary sounds of life returned. She waited a moment before standing, hoping to avoid attention. She did not succeed. Someone gently tapped her shoulder. She turned to see a woman about her age, eyes bright with excitement. "I didn't know you could play like that," the woman said softly, as if afraid to disturb the feeling that still hung in the air. She smiled, unsure of how to respond. "I don't usually play in front of people." "Well," the woman replied, "you should." Those simple words stayed with her. As she made her way toward the exit, more people stopped her. Nothing dramatic, just quiet compliments, honest reactions. A few asked where she had learned. Others said the music made them feel something they couldn't explain. Each comment landed gently, slowly sinking in. Outside, the air felt cooler. She took a deep breath and looked up at the sky. It was the same sky as before, but she felt different beneath it. She walked home alone, her footsteps steady on the pavement. The city sounds surrounded her, but her mind replayed the performance again and again. Not with fear this time, but with a strange sense of pride. At home, the familiar piano waited for her in the quiet room. She turned on a small lamp and sat down, just as she had done so many nights before. Her fingers hovered over the keys. She played softly, almost as if she were afraid to break the moment. The notes felt warmer now, more alive, as if the piano itself knew something had changed. She stopped and rested her forehead against the cool wood of the instrument. For years, she had believed her music belonged only to her. Something private, something hidden. Now she wondered if that belief had been holding her back. The next few days passed in a blur. At school and around the community, people treated her differently. Not in a loud or uncomfortable way, but with a new kind of respect. Some asked her to play again sometime. Others simply nodded at her, as if sharing a quiet understanding. The organizer of the event approached her one afternoon. Their tone was different now, less casual, more thoughtful. "I didn't expect that," they admitted. "You really surprised everyone." She nodded, unsure whether to feel happy or uneasy. "There might be another event coming up," they continued. "Something a bit bigger. Would you be interested?" The question made her pause. A bigger event meant more people, more eyes, more expectations. The old fear tried to return. She thought of the moment before she played, the doubt, the choice she had made. "Yes," she said quietly. "I think I would." That single word felt heavy, but also freeing. At night, she practiced more than ever. Not because she felt pressured, but because she wanted to. She explored new sounds, new emotions. She allowed herself to dream a little bigger. Still, doubt did not disappear completely. Some nights, she worried that the performance had been a one-time thing. A lucky moment. What if she couldn't do it again? What if she disappointed people? Those thoughts crept in when the room was dark and quiet. When that happened, she reminded herself why she played. Not for praise, not for attention, but because music had always been her way of understanding the world. She began to notice something else as well. Her story was reaching people she had never spoken to before. A neighbor mentioned hearing about her from someone else. A friend of a friend asked if she gave lessons. She laughed at that idea. Lessons? She had never seen herself as a teacher. But the thought stayed. She realized that her journey might not be just about her anymore. That her courage had given others permission to believe in hidden parts of themselves. One evening, she was invited to sit at a different piano, a newer one in a brighter room. She hesitated before agreeing. When she placed her hands on the keys, they felt unfamiliar. Too smooth, too perfect. She took a breath and began to play. The music came slower at first, then stronger. Different from before, but still honest. People listened. She noticed that she was no longer afraid of their attention. Nervous, yes, but not afraid. Afterward, she sat quietly, letting the moment settle. She thought about how close she had come to staying silent that first day. How easily she could have chosen safety instead of truth. That realization stayed with her. She knew challenges were ahead. More expectations, more pressure, more moments of doubt. But she also knew something else now. She had faced a room full of strangers and let her true voice be heard. And she was still standing. As she walked home that night, the city lights reflected softly on the ground. She felt tired, but it was a good kind of tired. The kind that comes from doing something real. Her life had not suddenly become perfect. Nothing magical had erased her worries. But a door had opened, and this time she was not afraid to step through it. The days after the second invitation felt heavier than she expected. Not in a bad way, but in a way that made her more aware of every step she took. Before, music had lived mostly in quiet corners of her life. Now it was slowly stepping into the open. She noticed how people listened when she spoke about music. They asked questions. They waited for her answers. That was new. It made her careful with her words, but also more confident. The larger event was still weeks away, yet her mind returned to it often. She imagined the room, the faces, the sound of the piano filling a space bigger than she was used to. Sometimes the thought excited her. Other times it made her stomach twist. At night, she practiced as she always had, but something was different. She no longer rushed through the difficult parts. She let herself sit with the harder emotions that came through the music. Sadness, joy, fear, hope. She allowed them all to exist. There were moments when she stopped playing and simply listened to the silence afterward. That silence no longer felt empty. Felt full, like a breath being held. People began to recognize her on the street. Not many, but enough to surprise her. A nod, a smile, a quiet "you're the one who played, right?" Each interaction reminded her that her music had reached beyond the room where it was first heard. One afternoon, she was asked to play during a small gathering before the main event. Nothing official. Just a warm-up, they said. She almost declined. The word warm-up made her feel small again. But she remembered how close she had come to saying no the first time. So she agreed. The space was informal. People stood instead of sitting. Conversations buzzed in the background. The piano was off to the side, not the focus of the room. At first, she felt invisible again. She sat down and placed her hands on the keys. The noise around her felt loud, distracting. For a moment, she wondered if this was a mistake. Then she started to play. Slowly, the room changed. People turned their heads. Conversations softened. The music rose gently, weaving through the space like a thread, pulling everyone together. She didn't play to impress. She played to connect. By the time she finished, the room was quiet. Not silent, but attentive. People clapped, some softly, some with real enthusiasm. She stood up feeling calm instead of nervous. That was when she realized something important. Her confidence was no longer tied to one performance. It was growing piece by piece, note by note. As the main event grew closer, pressure followed. Expectations had formed, even if no one said them out loud. People assumed she would deliver something just as powerful again. She felt that weight. There were days when the piano felt heavy beneath her fingers, when nothing sounded right, when doubt returned with full force. On those days, she stepped away. She took long walks. She listened to other music. She reminded herself that she was still learning, still growing. The night before the event, sleep did not come easily. Her mind replayed every possible mistake, every wrong note, every moment where she might freeze. She sat at the piano one last time, not to practice, but to breathe. She played a few quiet notes and stopped. That was enough. The day arrived sooner than she expected. The venue was larger, brighter, and filled with more people. The piano stood at the center this time, not hidden off to the side. Seeing it there made her heart race. Backstage, she waited quietly while others prepared. She listened to the sounds of the crowd, the distant laughter, the low hum of anticipation. When her turn came, she felt strangely calm. She walked onto the stage with steady steps. The lights were warm, but strong. She could not see every face, but she could feel them. She sat down. The bench felt familiar, solid, real. She placed her hands on the keys and paused, just as she had before. This time, the pause was not filled with fear. She began to play. The music flowed naturally, like it had been waiting for this moment. She did not rush. She did not hold back. Every note carried intention. The audience listened closely. She could feel their attention, but it did not distract her. Supported her. As the piece built, the sound filled the space completely. The piano was no longer just an instrument. It was a voice, clear and strong. She reached the final notes and let them fade slowly. The response was immediate. Applause rose, loud and full. People stood. Some cheered softly. Others simply clapped with emotion written clearly on their faces. She stood and bowed, her heart pounding. In that moment, she did not think about being told to play something basic. She did not think about being overlooked. She thought about how far she had come from the quiet room where she first learned to play. When she left the stage, she felt lightheaded, but happy. People spoke to her afterward, offering praise, asking questions, sharing how the music made them feel. She listened carefully, grateful for each word. Later that night, alone again, she sat at her piano at home. The room was quiet. She played a few notes and smiled. She knew the journey was not over. There would be more challenges, more doubts, more moments where she would have to choose courage over comfort. But she also knew this. She was no longer hiding, and she was ready for whatever came next. The days after the big performance did not feel loud or dramatic. There were no sudden changes, no overnight fame, no perfect ending tied with a ribbon. Instead, life moved forward in a quiet, steady way, and somehow that made everything feel more real. She woke up the next morning feeling tired but calm, the kind of calm that comes after doing something honest. She made her usual breakfast, opened the window, and let the fresh air fill the room. The piano sat in its familiar place, silent but present. She did not rush to play. For the first time, she allowed herself to simply exist without pressure. Messages began to arrive later that day. Some from people she knew, others from people she barely remembered. They spoke about the music, about how it stayed with them, about how it reminded them of parts of themselves they had forgotten. She read each message slowly. Instead of excitement, what she felt most was responsibility. Not in a heavy way, but in a thoughtful one. She understood now that music could do more than fill a room, could reach places words never could. In the following weeks, small opportunities appeared. Nothing overwhelming. Invitations to play again. Requests to join community events. Quiet conversations about future possibilities. She did not say yes to everything. She learned to pause, to listen to her instincts, to choose what felt right instead of what sounded impressive. Some days doubt returned. It always did. There were mornings when she sat at the piano and felt unsure again. When the keys felt distant. When the music refused to come. She no longer panicked during those moments. She had learned that silence was part of the process. On one such day, she closed the piano lid and went for a long walk. She watched people pass by, each carrying their own unseen stories. It reminded her that everyone was hiding something, waiting for the right moment to be seen. That thought stayed with her. She began spending time with people who loved music not for attention, but for meaning. They shared stories, struggles, and dreams. She listened more than she spoke. Through them, she learned that talent alone was never enough. What mattered was honesty, consistency, courage. One evening, she was asked to speak to a small group before playing. Just a few words, they said. Nothing serious. She almost refused. Standing in front of people without a piano felt harder than performing. Still, she agreed. When the moment came, she stood quietly, hands folded, heart beating fast. She looked at the faces in front of her and took a breath. She spoke about fear, about being told to keep things basic, about hiding parts of herself to stay comfortable. Her voice was soft, but steady. She did not try to sound inspiring. She simply told the truth. When she finished speaking and sat down at the piano, the room felt closer somehow, more connected. She played. The music flowed gently, not powerful like before, but warm and honest. People listened with the same attention. That was when she truly understood something. Her journey was no longer about proving anything. It was about sharing. At home, her relationship with the piano deepened. She played without expectations. Sometimes strong, sometimes soft. Sometimes just a few notes. The instrument that once felt like a secret now felt like a companion. She remembered the younger version of herself, sitting alone in a quiet room, believing her music was only meant to be heard by the walls. She wished she could reach back and say one thing: don't rush, don't hide, your moment will come. Life continued with its usual challenges. Bills, responsibilities, doubts. None of that disappeared, but something inside her had changed. When people underestimated her now, it no longer hurt the same way. She understood that their limits were not hers. She also became more careful with how she spoke to others. She knew how powerful words could be, how easily they could shrink or strengthen someone. One afternoon, she heard a young person practicing piano nearby. The notes were unsure, imperfect, but full of effort. She listened quietly from a distance and smiled. She did not interrupt. She did not judge. She remembered how important it was to feel safe while learning. Months later, when someone once again suggested she keep it simple, she smiled. Not because she agreed, but because she no longer felt the need to explain. She knew when to be simple and when to be bold. The choice was hers now. On a quiet night, she sat at the piano with the lights low. The world outside was still. She placed her fingers on the keys and played the first melody she ever learned. It sounded different now. Not because the notes had changed, but because she had. She played until the room felt full, then stopped and let the silence settle. There was no applause, and she did not need any. Her journey had taught her something lasting. Being powerful did not always mean being loud. Sometimes it meant being brave enough to be real. And that was more than enough.